we have to shift our paradigm around people pleasing away from like, well, if I stop people pleasing, then I'm not giving enough. And it's like, no, actually, you're creating the conditions to give your best, because if you are people pleasing, saying yes to everything, running yourself all around, what do you have to offer that's of quality?
Hello, my name is KristinConstable, and welcome to the Soulful CEO Path, where wisdom blends with strategy and success is measured in alignment and impact. This show is all about guiding soul-centered entrepreneurs like you through the integration of soul and strategy in business. And in our conversations, we're going to explore the journey of creating a deeply fulfilling business that honors your values, nurtures your spirit, and serves the world. And today we have Elizabeth Stranzl on the show. And Elizabeth is a boundaries and relationship coach. She helps other women build the skills to quit people pleasing, set boundaries, and say no without fear or guilt so that they can live the joyful and empowered lives that they deserve. And today we're going to have a really important conversation around how boundaries and our social emotional health impact the way that we show up and either thrive or struggle in business. And so for anyone who has ever experienced burnout in their business, or if you're clear that that's a path that you want to avoid, this episode is going to be for you. So let's dive right in. Elizabeth, welcome to the Soulful CEO Path.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be an awesome conversation. And I know boundaries and burnout are a conversation that comes up a lot in the coaching work that I do. And so I'm really excited to have you in here with this like expert lens around why those two things go together and how creating healthy boundaries can really support us as entrepreneurs in our business. So maybe a good place to start, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this, is what do healthy boundaries even look like when we're talking about like boundaries and this like health around this? What does that even look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the first place to start is just getting crystal clear that boundaries are guidelines we set up for ourselves. So sometimes we think of boundaries as like rules or something super like harsh or mean or about other people. And it's really just the guidelines under which we say, okay, this is how I'm going to show up. This is where and when I'm going to show up. Here's how I'm not going to show up. And honestly, a lot of this is rooted in self-awareness, because there's no like one right boundary, right? Like the boundaries I need are not the boundaries you need, are not the boundaries that your listeners need. It's very personal to what do we know about ourselves? What are our current constraints as it relates to business? Like, what is your business model? What are your business needs? What is your lifestyle? Like, I'm a single mom and I still have a full-time day job outside of my business. So the boundaries that I'm going to need are going to look a lot different than someone who's in a different life circumstance. So I think it's like, first of all, giving ourselves permission to do it, and then knowing ourselves well to know what do I need personally and what makes sense in the context of my work life, my business, and my goals.
Yeah, awesome. And I love that you bring up this idea around it doesn't have to be harsh or it doesn't have to be mean, because I think that you mentioned that you support people and kind of overcoming the people pleasing side of
Yeah,
things. And,
yeah,
that can be a big roadblock for people in my experience around holding boundaries, is that they may even know, and we'll get to this later around like how do you like tune into your intuition so you understand what your boundaries are. But if people even know what their boundaries are, implementing them can be a different story. So let's dive into that a little bit if you're open to it, around like, what would you say for business owners would be a great place to start when identifying what their individual boundaries are in to support them in thriving as humans and business owners?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think that where I recommend everyone starts is with your pain points. I encourage people to think back to like, what are the places in your business where either you or your clients or both felt a lot of distress? Like either because you were working too hard, you were forcing a delivery model that was not working anymore, you were taking on too many clients and the quality suffered and then you felt bad about it after. Like you ran yourself into the ground and then you were exhausted for 2 weeks because you took on more than you could handle. Like starting with where are you experiencing distress? Like that's a signal. And this can be physical distress. Like I used to be a chronic people pleaser, so I know this life very well. I would have migraines. I would be exhausted. I would have body aches. Like my body was like, girl, hello, hello, you need to slow down. And I just was not ready to hear it. And so I think starting with our personal pain points, whether that's actually like physically our body is shutting down or emotionally, like where do you just not feel good? Where do your clients not feel good? And starting there and being like, okay, this isn't how I want to show up in the world. This is not the service that I want to offer clients. And I think once we get clear on like what the breakdowns, where we're really experiencing distress, then you're going into visioning of like, okay, well, what would I need for this to be
Mm-hmm.
different? Like
Mm-hmm.
what would have to change? And a huge shift that I think we need to make as women as it relates to people pleasing is understanding that it's not to restrict, it's to enable. So we sometimes think
Mm.
of boundaries as these brick walls, and like
Yeah.
if I want to be a servant, I have to say yes and I have to do this and I have to do that. Well, you can't give a good yes if you never say no. So we have to shift our paradigm around people pleasing away from like, well, if I stop people pleasing, then I'm not giving enough. And it's like, no, actually you're creating the conditions to give your best, because if you are people pleasing, saying yes to everything, running yourself all around, what do you have to offer that's of quality, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that there's a big hurdle there, because one, women are socialized to be givers and doers and servants and all the things, and then especially business owners, we got into this, and we got
Yeah.
into entrepreneurship to serve, and
Yeah.
we want to do that, and that's a noble, beautiful calling. But the way in which we do it is significantly impacted by our ability to cut off the people pleasing and set boundaries so that we can show up in the ways that honor our gifts and honor our clients and what they need.
Yeah. Oh, I love that reframe too. Is like if you it starts off, or the subliminal intention is like, I just want to serve and I want to give, but the outcome of it is that by doing that, you actually are doing yourself and your clients a disservice, and that's the like unexpected, I think, ripple effect and outcome of not listening to those signals that you're talking about. And I guarantee you, most of the listeners, I know myself, I can say, is like there's times where I've overridden those things and it never works out well. Like
Yeah.
it never.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is like we also have to take accountability for the fact that we're then creating these conditions that are stressing us out and burning us out. And
Yeah.
sometimes when we're in people pleaser territory, we can teeter a little bit into like almost a victim mindset of like, I do all these things and I did this and I did that and I did
Mm-hmm.
this. And it's like, well, hey, nobody asked you to do that. You know,
Yeah.
like we sometimes are taking all this stuff on, and it starts out from a good place, but we have a responsibility to ourselves and to our clients to check that a little bit. And when
Yeah.
we don't and we burn out, we can't be pointing the finger at like, oh, but like, no, we did that. Like, I did
Yes.
that. You know, I
Yeah.
have to own that. Like, that's
Yeah.
me. That's my responsibility. So,
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. It just reminds me of this story I'll share to really ground it, and I think how it can show up in business. So, at the beginning of this year, I was like, I want to play with a more accessible offer for my audience. So, I was like, I'm going to do a 1 month package. And I usually don't do anything less than 3 months. So, a 1 month package. And included in it was Voxer access to me. So, it was like, in a month, we're going to do like a really deep dive where you get unlimited Voxer access to me. And there's this one client, because I didn't set up the boundaries properly around it needs to be on one project, because that is all that makes sense for that, really. But I didn't set that up properly. So she's voxering me. She's on it, right? She wants to get the most results out of her package, and she's like, bless her, like she's like into
yeah,
it and
yeah,
like really
yeah, yeah.
energized. And all of a sudden I notice myself getting really bitter. Like I'm like annoyed by her messages that are coming through. And I'm like, what is going on? And I'm like, it's a me thing, not a her thing. I didn't set up the boundaries properly here around what this engagement was going to be. And now I'm getting triggered because I feel like there is like that lack of clarity and whatever, all the stories that come up. So beautiful reminder to myself around like, oh, it's me that needs to put those boundaries in place. She's not doing anything wrong. She's actually just getting the most out of what she paid for, which is
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. So, anyways, that just reminds me of that. And
Yeah.
then, yeah, to what you were saying too, is like noticing those little things like the irritation
Yeah.
as, trigger points around, okay, there's something here that might be
Yeah.
a signal that
Yeah.
a boundary is either not been put in place or is being crossed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's so relatable. I mean, how many times we do that and we realize like, oh, well, they're just doing what I'm allowing them to do, and it's not even always malicious. It's like you said, could be with great intentions, but even good things left unchecked can become harmful.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe we can dive a little bit into boundaries and burnout because we're kind of like touching on that. So, like, for example, if I didn't do anything different and just kept doing those packages, um, that would have led to burnout for sure. So, can you share a little bit about what you see in terms of how these two things go together and how working on your boundaries as a entrepreneur is not like a nice to have, like it's a must. And that's just my opinion on it, but I think you'll
Yeah.
agree.
No, 100%. So yeah, I'll actually offer a story about that because I
Mhm.
think storytelling helps people see themselves in the context. So when I was younger, this is still in my people pleaser days before I like got myself together. I felt like I was coming to a place of burnout. So I was feeling tired. I was feeling disorganized at work. I was not able to focus. Tasks were slipping through my fingers, and I was like, okay, I'm like on the edge of burnout. Let me go on a solo weekend. And so,
Mhm.
we pump ourselves up for these things like, oh, I'm going to rest. I'm going to sleep late. I'm going to do all the things. So I go on this weekend and I literally did rest like the whole entire time. I went to Miami for the weekend, laid on the beach, did like nothing. It was
Yeah.
great. So now in my mind, I'm like, okay, I cured burnout. I'm ready. Here I
Mhm.
come. I'm ready to come back. I'm like, okay, 10 o'clock Monday morning, I had to close the door to my office and take a nap on the couch because I was literally falling asleep at my computer. And it was in that moment that I realized the difference between tired, which is when you need a nap, and burnt
Mhm.
out, which is when you need boundaries and your life is running all over for you. And I
Mhm.
think that sometimes people think they're just tired because they're doing tasks. They're tired because they're busy. And it's like there is a distinction between I had a very busy day, and so I'm going to rest and recover versus I'm burnt out. And not only am I physically tired, but like mentally, I'm not as sharp. I'm forgetting things. I'm depressed or sad or unfocused. I'm irritable. Like,
Mhm.
and being really clear on what is the difference. And if you want to test that, if you're like, well, I don't know, am I burnt out? Take a nap. And if after
Mhm.
a 2 hour recharge and like an organization of your day, you don't feel like you're back in the game, you feel like you're still really struggling, then you're probably teetering a little close to burnout. Check your
Mhm.
mood. Like, how irritable are you? How are you showing up? Like, we have to. And part of why I think this is so important is because I feel like society has women on a treadmill of doing, where we're just doing tasks, and so
Mhm.
we have become almost numb to the reality of what burnout actually is until it knocks us over and we're asleep on the couch in our office, or until
Yeah.
we have to cancel a group container with clients because we literally can't even show up, or
Mhm.
like there's levels to this as they say. And
Yeah.
so I think that you know not having boundaries doesn't just sacrifice your own personal well-being. It will cost you your whole business if you burn out,
Mhm.
because you will have nothing to give. It will damage your
Yeah.
reputation. People will start to feel like, oh yeah, I mean, I went to the session but she was kind of off. Like, I had heard good reviews but it wasn't really that great. And it's because we're
Yeah.
just, even if you're physically there, like when you're burnt out, you're checked out and you're not offering high quality service because you're just trying to survive.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I know my own experience with burnout was like it's not something to come that I could come back from with
Yeah.
like even a week of rest. Like it
Right.
was so deep that it really required a complete restructuring of the way that I oriented towards life and work and like
Yeah.
how much self-care and how much I was willing to take on as someone who like I think I have always identified as someone who has high capacity.
Mhm.
But that high capacity, that can also be like like a facade for
Mhm.
over giving, right? It's like,
Overdoing.
I've got
Yeah.
high capacity. I can do a lot of things. Yeah, but like at what cost?
Yes. And that
Yeah.
gets rewarded. So, like, part of why
Yes.
people pleasing and lack of boundaries is so pervasive is because those things get rewarded. When we people please and overextend, we hear things like, oh, you're so cooperative. You're so
Hmm.
generous. You're so helpful. Gosh, you're so efficient. Gosh, you get
Yeah.
so much done. And then what happens is then our ego gets involved and it's like, oh, yeah, I am such a doer. I am so productive. And then we start to take this on. And then the problem is because that has allowed us to be successful, and sometimes that allows us to be successful in business, because think about how many hats you have to wear as an entrepreneur. Now, then when we do think that, okay, we're confronting a possible place of burnout, it brings into question, like, well, can I still do this business with boundaries? And we feel vulnerable, like, well, I'm not, there aren't any balls I'm willing to drop. There isn't anything I can stop doing. So how do I navigate this? And, like, what does this say about me? Am I still a hard worker if I set boundaries around not working on the weekends? Or am I still a caring, going above and beyond coach if I don't agree to a 6 a.m. session when that really doesn't work for me? Like, and then we're really required to confront ourselves and our own understanding of boundaries as a concept, because we feel vulnerable to what could be taken away.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, you touched on something so important, I think, and it's around the identity piece.
Yeah.
Because, if we don't look at that identity piece around, like, for example, for me, it's like a hard worker was like rewarded. It was ingrained, like even in sports at a young age, is like just work hard and you'll get where you want. So it's like so embedded. And then we follow ourselves wherever we go, obviously. So whether it be relationships or the relationship with our business, we're going to show up. So in business, it's really interesting because it's like, even, well, really, I would say relationships and business are kind of like in my mind about the same, but it's so you can't get away from it. It's so confronting, whether it be burnout or toxic relationships or whatever. So it actually gives us this really cool container to be able to see and to work on some of these patterns that otherwise might be kind of like pushed under the rug or not quite, identified. But then you identify okay, this identity piece isn't working for me. And then it's like, okay, who am I? Who am I without that? And so I'd be interested to hear from you, is like, if people have come to this realization, because the people that I've coached, is it's not uncommon for people to have like multiple rounds of this, is like, oh, I got burnt out, and then like, okay, I'm going to do it differently. Oh, I got burnt out. And I think part of it goes back to the identity piece. But maybe we can give the listeners something to like really, like, if someone is listening to this and they're like, oh my gosh, I see myself in that pattern, what are some ways that healthy boundaries can sound, and how might where are some of the like really specific places you might want to look in your business, whether it be like schedule, self-care? Like, I'm not sure if you have any specific examples around that.
Yeah, so this is a great question. So as far as, like, where in your life or what they can look like, I think we can set boundaries around our time. We can set
Mm-hmm.
boundaries around our conversation, things we will or will not talk about. We can set physical boundaries around, like, that's more of an intimate relationship than a professional relationship, but, like, think of, there's all different categories of your life in which you could set boundaries. Some people, they're doing the right things, they're just doing way too much of them. Some people are not doing the right things and they're overextending emotionally, and then that's draining them and it's taking them from somewhere else. So I think, similar to what we were talking about before, like, we'll figure out your pain points. Is it just that you're doing too much? Is it that you're doing the wrong things? Is that when you're showing up, you're inappropriately divulging too much of yourself and then you're feeling uncomfortable? Like, what is it that is making it difficult for you? And then start to think about, like, some very practical things. So, like, easy ones on your time, like, I don't work past X o'clock. I only work X number of days per week. When I work, I do schedule blocking. This is a big one for entrepreneurs because there's
Mm-hmm.
so many tasks and we love to do the fun parts. And then when we do the fun parts too much, and then we have all the other parts, it's like, well, wait a minute, but I still have to do, I love this. I just spent 2 hours on my group curricula and I'm super excited about it, but I didn't build the back end systems. Nobody can register. So now
Mm-hmm.
I've got to stay up and do that because I wasn't disciplined with my time. So even just something as
Yes.
simple as scheduling can help you reinforce boundaries, because it's like, I only have this amount of time to work on it. And the way that it is at the end of those 2 hours, that's what I have to give. Now,
Yeah.
if it's like really far off the mark, then okay, maybe you adjust your schedule later and figure out some way to recoup some of that time. But
Yeah.
like literally just sticking to a schedule. Like what I encourage people to do on the entrepreneurial side of boundaries is like, what are your core objectives? Priority used to be a singular word, and in this century we've turned it into a plural word. Okay, so like 1, 2 things max. Like, are
Yeah.
you growing your community? Are you nurturing your community? Are you generating leads? Are you signing people to an offer? Like, narrow your focus for the short term and then structure your time around that, and then build in cycles of routine where you're actually holding yourself accountable to like, okay, my schedule was that this week I had 20 hours. So maybe you're a part-time entrepreneur. I had 20 hours to give to the business. That was broken up into 5 4-hour blocks on XYZ. Did I actually spend my time that way? I did. Amazing. I didn't. Why not? What were the threats to the boundary? Were there interruptions? Was it my own discipline? Was it someone in my support system not having my back? Like, just being really kind of rigid on the timing can be huge, because that will illuminate for you where the boundary violations are occurring, or like where are the pain points coming from. Another super practical thing, once you've gotten an idea of what your boundaries need to be, is to build systems of care around you. Like, who are the people in your life that know your boundaries and how are they honoring them? Sometimes we think that people just know what we need, but like, we have to tell them. They don't. They're
Yeah.
not mind readers, okay? And then we have to tell them how they can support us. So
Yeah.
sometimes some people, they don't, if it's not a boundary for them or it's not a trigger for them, they might think that they're encouraging by being like, oh yeah, just, you're on a roll, give it another hour and that slide deck's gonna look great. But maybe
Mm-hmm.
what you need is someone to say, you did your best and your
Yeah.
best is good enough, so rest so that you can show up recharged the next day.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think another like super practical thing that helps people in these situations is affirmations. Like, we, when you are quitting people pleasing and shifting to boundary setting, you're basically reprogramming your operating system. And that starts with your own thought processes before you ever get to your behaviors. And so,
Mm-hmm.
if you are venturing into this territory, I would suggest people start to actually script out like, what is your belief system around boundaries and the way
Mm-hmm.
that you show up, and anchor yourself there, because chances are there's some dysfunctional thinking that has like crept its way in. So
Yeah.
figuring out what that is and then rewriting that and then anchoring yourself back to that, like, because and I guess this is the last thing that I'll say on this for right now is like, you should expect discomfort, because this is a new process and a new skill set, and that doesn't mean boundary setting is wrong. Sometimes we set a boundary for the first time, we do it a little bit awkwardly, or maybe we did it without a plan, it doesn't go well, and then the conclusion we draw is like, well, boundaries don't work, or boundaries don't work for me. That can work for someone else, it's not going to work for me. We always like exceptionalize or make our circumstance so unique when these things are very common to other people. And it's like, no, boundaries do work. But did you set a boundary that was reasonable? Did you have a plan? Like, so being able to build in like some reflection and honestly like continue to be willing to be uncomfortable as you go through it, but like ensuring that you have some combination of like the technical tools, like a schedule, a support system, a calendar, time limitations, like have those technical things. And then also you really need the adaptive work of like, what am I saying to myself about this? How am I supporting myself through this? Do I understand this is a change process and it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable? Like, you
Yes.
really need to have both.
Yes. Oh, I love that you're bringing up that it's a change process. I
Yeah.
think that that is like so critical in this whole conversation, because it can, otherwise, it might come off that a boundary is simply a behavior, like as you said, simply saying the thing, simply creating the time block in the calendar. And we all know, I think everyone probably, or yeah, most people can relate to this, is like, I can say how many times I've had a time block in my calendar and I haven't kept to it. So it's not about the calendar and the time block. It's about our relationship to that and holding that boundary. And so the reflective piece, the identity piece that you've brought up around like, going back and like looking at, why am I loose with this boundary? What am I making this mean about setting this boundary, is so powerful. And the exceptionalization piece is, I think I want to just double click on that, because, well, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this actually. So, there will whether it's like human design types that people want to bring in, or just ways of working. There'll be people who are like, I'm not a structure person, right? I don't like structure. And my experience is structure creates freedom. So when we create structure, it allows us to have the freedom that we're seeking. If we just like kind of like move through the world however we want, it is chaotic and it feels chaotic. But what would you say to people who are averse to structure when it comes to boundaries around time?
I would say, is it working for you? Because probably it's not.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
I think that we societally have a really skewed relationship to the idea of discipline and structure. And we have told ourselves that comfort, like a lot of what we call self-care, is actually comfort and indulgence, and that's fine. But real self-care looks like discipline and reconstruction. It looks like doing the things that are good for us, not just make us feel good in the moment. And so as it relates to what you were saying, like, I could not agree more. Check, 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 plus. Because like, discipline creates freedom. I saw an interview with Venus Williams on this where she was like, I'm only able to do what I do because of how disciplined I am. Because once I discipline myself to do what I have to do, I create the freedom to do what I want to do. And this is true personally. Yeah, she's like, I love her so much. This is true personally, and it's true professionally as well. And so, I mean, I do think that there are people who are maybe more inclined to structure than others. However, I have yet to meet someone that doesn't operate on some type of structure. And if someone is like, well, I don't really do structure, I mean, okay, is that working for you? Like, maybe. If it is, then like, amen. But chances are your clients need structure. Your clients want a predictable schedule. Your clients need a routine. Like, not everyone is the super type A. I joke around, I'm like the Virgoist of Virgos. I am like, that's me, capital V Virgo. I love structure, all the things. I know not everyone is as intense as I am, and I can own that. But like, we are all creatures of structure and routine. And actually, if you're my background before coaching was as a psychologist, and one of the most important things for people who have experienced trauma is safety and predictability, because when we know what to expect, we can feel emotionally safe and comfortable. And the same is true even outside of a trauma lens. Like, structure creates freedom and it creates safety, because I know what to expect. I know what the guidelines are. Imagine how chaotic it would be as an entrepreneur if you never followed a schedule. If you just like woke up and did like, I'm just following my passion. Okay. I mean, hey, I guess, again, if it works for you, I guess, but like, I've just never met anyone for whom that works for them.
yeah.
And so I think, like, now the degree of structure that we all need, sure, that's variable, but I think our mindset around structure and discipline and boundaries has become so negative. Like, we see discipline as punishment, and we see indulgence as care. And I think that's just totally reversed.
Yeah, that's a really interesting distinction around, the self-care piece, specifically, because I think that also, going back to our conversation around burnout, if we're indulging in our time off to reset, right? So maybe it's like, I don't know, watching Netflix, for like binging Netflix for a few hours, is like, that's actually not going to support, likely, with the recharge that you actually need. Probably time in nature, movement, like light movement, something like that is going to be more supportive. But we might not feel like it
Mm-hmm.
because at the end of the day, we're
Doesn't feel
tired.
fun.
And yeah, and it's like, I just want to cozy up. Like, it's getting dark here already. It's only 4:30. It's like
I know.
so easy to just be like, I'm gonna
Yeah.
have dinner and go to sleep. But like, the walk is really important after work. So yeah, I think that's a really nice distinction, as we're kind of like trying to drop some nuggets for people around this. Like, what are some boundaries? Is like, boundaries don't always have to feel good for yourself either. They can feel sticky in the moment, like holding them, but the outcome is the thing that creates that like long-term benefit, is what I kind of hear you saying.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, like, you could sometimes, an analogy that helps for people to is to think about food. So like, a cupcake tastes better than a raw carrot stick, but are you going to sustain yourself on cupcakes? No, you're going to have to eat fruits and vegetables to live a long and healthy life. And the same is true, like, with the Netflix. I'm not hating on relaxation. We should relax and we should have fun and get into a show and follow characters, but if that that's not going to refuel you and sustain you in the way that exercise, rest, meditation, faith, if that's, a value of yours, like those are the things that will sustain you, and those are the things that will nourish you and allow you to keep showing up. Recreation is a piece of the pie, but it is not the comprehensive self-care plan.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. So, one final little thing I want to explore, because we've been talking about time boundaries and boundaries with self, which I think is a nice distinction to make. And then let's talk about boundaries with others. So, and we kind of touched on this at the beginning of the conversation around how boundaries can feel harsh. But specifically, what I'd love to get your insight on is because again, it's a change process, even with other people. And so, what happens when we set a boundary with someone, or maybe it's clients, and they don't like honor that? And so now we're in this spot of, do we just let it go, which obviously is not going to lead to a good long-term outcome, or how do we reinforce that boundary, and what happens? Like, how do we escalate those kinds of things?
Yeah, this is a great question. So I think that except for very extreme cases where someone has demonstrated like a really toxic or harmful behavior, I like to assume best intentions and give people the benefit of the doubt. So the first time that before we even get to a place of them not honoring the boundary, we have to take accountability for having clearly communicated it. So assuming that we did that, assuming that there was a clear conversation about that, then the first time I like to use humor or something light to draw their attention to, oops, you talked about, you asked me about my boyfriend, and I told you that in sessions I just keep it about the business and I don't share personal stuff. I'm sure you didn't mean it. Let's get back to that, chart that we were working on. Something light, something fun. Oops, okay, friendly reminder, I don't talk about that, or friendly
Yeah.
reminder, I don't answer the phone on weekends. I saw that you called, no problem, but moving forward, whatever. Second time, I come right out and name it. And this is, again, not mean, but it is simple, direct, and clear. I set a boundary in this area, and this is the second time that you haven't honored it. I'm going to reiterate that this is a need that I have, and I'm asking you to, you know, uh, I'm letting you know, because it's not really, you're not asking their permission. It's more like, I set a boundary in this area. This is the second time that it hasn't been honored. Moving forward, and then you preview a consequence. And this is where people really start to feel icky. And I just want to be clear that, like, a consequence is not a punishment. Okay. We are not our clients' parents, and we are not disciplining them the way that a parent might discipline a child or someone might influence a punishment. A consequence is just what occurs as a result of a previous action. So it's whatever comes next. So if you are not prepared to implement consequences for boundary violations, then you're really not prepared for consequences, because some people will test the boundary, whether that's intentional or unintentional. So the first time is like, oops, hey, sorry, friendly reminder. Second time, I set a boundary and it's not being honored. This is what I'm going to do moving forward. And then third time is like, if it's not honored, then. So if you continue to call me after hours, I will have to end our coaching relationship. I will blah, blah, blah. And it's not to say, because we're not controlling the actions of other people. Those are rules. Technically, the person could call you 100 times. But if you keep violating the boundary, I'm going to block your number. I'm going to put it on do not disturb. I'm going to terminate the coaching relationship. I'm going to remove myself, because this doesn't work for me anymore. And one of the things that I think we owe to people, well, I don't think we owe people in our lives an explanation from the perspective of justifying. Like, we don't need people to approve our boundaries. Okay. We are empowered to make those decisions for ourselves. I do think it is helpful and fair to offer some insight into why. So, hey, and this is where we can make it lighter, because we make it about us and not about punishing others. Hey girl, oh my God, I have learned that I just do not do my best coaching when I'm exhausted. I've just learned I can't stay up past 9. I'm an old lady now. I can't do the late night hours. So I cut my phone off at 9. So I'm not going to be answering any calls after that time. I'm not going to be doing any meetings after that time. I hope you understand that it's to make sure I'm giving you the best that I have. So you're making it about you. You're clear on what it is, and you're also offering some rationale so that it feels personal. Like, this doesn't have to be this like mean and robotic rules, like, don't call me after 9. I don't take phone calls after 9 because it drains me and then I don't get to show up well. So when you have done that, when you have assumed best intentions about the person you're setting the boundary with, when you have set the boundary clearly but kindly, when you have given some insight into why this even matters for you, and you've done all that, then if there are boundary violations, you can in good faith like
Yeah.
acknowledge it and disengage and know that like you've done what is reasonable for you to do. So
Yes. Yeah, that's super helpful. I love the like very clear steps that you've outlined,
yeah.
and how to make it just a bit lighter than it needing.
Yeah.
Like sometimes as it progresses, obviously it might need to get like more direct and more clear. But as you mentioned, the first couple rounds is like, just really be making it about you and why this is important to you. And I think what's helpful about that is when we communicate from that place, if someone is still going to violate the boundary after that, it becomes like super clear that it's just not a good fit. So yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you for that.
No, you're
And
welcome.
yeah, is there anything else when it comes to boundaries, burnout, business, entrepreneurship that you think would be really helpful to share with the audience today?
I mean, I think the only other thing I would add, and I think we kind of touched on this, but I'll just like circle back to this point, is I think it's really valuable for business owners to spend time thinking about their values as a business owner. What do they believe their commitments are? What do they believe they owe their clients or don't owe their clients? And what are some of like their philosophies just around boundaries in business in general? And then what are some of their philosophies around boundaries for themselves? And like really getting concrete with like, but so what does that actually mean in practice? Because I've never met someone who was like, girl, boundaries are overrated. No one really needs that. And everyone, like, intuitively, people agree with the concept. It's the application in our own lives where we get stuck. And that's either because our own social conditioning as young children or young adults starts to creep in, issues of self esteem, issues of worthiness, identity. Like, there can be a lot of reasons why someone agrees with boundaries as a concept but struggles to implement them in their own lives. And I think spending time really grounding yourself in some of those values and what that actually means for you day to day is really valuable, because when we try to skip right to the actions of boundary setting before we've done the mindset work, we often like fumble or we'll backpedal when we meet resistance because we don't really believe we deserve it. Like, it sounded good, so I was like, I'm going to set boundaries as a business owner. But then the first time that someone's like, wow, I thought you were more helpful than that, we immediately revert back to like the helper, the doer, the fixer. And it's just because our foundation wasn't strong. And so I think
Yes.
the more that we can ground ourselves and really stay there up front, the easier it is to do it consistently with integrity and not feel bad about it. Because, like,
Yeah.
you don't want to go from feeling bad as a people pleaser to feeling bad as a boundary setter. Like, that's not the goal,
Trading
you
one
know?
ship for the other.
Yeah, like who
Yeah.
wants to do that? It's miserable. So I think that, I would just encourage people to lean in and to be curious. Like, so often we judge ourselves or other people's behavior. Behavior is information. It's insight into what we need and what we know, and being curious, like, wow, this, like, I really kind of struggled there. Why? And like, what can I learn from that? And how could I do something different? I think we could just show ourselves a lot more grace in this area, and it would lead to so much more productivity than just like, oh, there I go again, dropped another boundary. Like
Yeah.
that's totally unhelpful. So,
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. And as you said, it's a process, it's a change process.
yeah,
And the neat thing about this is that it cannot not positively impact other areas of your life. So whether
100%.
you start like within your personal life and then it impacts business, or you start in business and it impacts personal, like it's all related. So doing this work and really noticing where it might be showing up in our businesses will be, yeah, it'll just positively impact everything else. So really, I think helpful, grounded conversation today. So thank you so much. One question I always ask people at the end of the show is that the show is called the Soulful CEO Path. So it's around, how to lead our businesses and thrive as humans and business owners. So very related to what we were talking about today. But one of the things I ask guests is, what does it mean to you personally to be a soulful CEO? And how would you define that?
I love that question. I think it's a few things. I would say, for one, like, part of the beauty of this earthly experience that we have is how diverse we all are as individuals. And I think there's so much power and opportunity when we just own the truth of who we are. And so I feel like, to me, being a soulful CEO is showing up fully as yourself and only saying, like, it's me versus me. I'm not competing, like, I have so much more to offer when I'm just giving from who I authentically am and not trying to be someone else in the way I show up and in the services that I offer. I feel like, to me, that feels soulful. It's like, this is really the true essence of who I am. Like, yeah, I'm a trained psychologist, and I'm also like your internet bestie, giving you moral support in my regular, like, hey girl vibe, like,
Yeah.
this is who I am, and I'm offering you the best and most authentic version of who I am, with the expectation that that meets the best and most authentic version of who you are as a client. And then I think for people who follow a particular faith or believe in a higher power, I'll speak for myself in this situation. Faith is so central to my life that I think about work as a form of prayer and a form of service. This is an offering of my life's work. This is an offering of skills and abilities that I feel like God has given to me. And it's a privilege and an honor to be able to share that with other people. Yeah, but to me, that feels soulful, and that feels like it's an incredible privilege to be able to do this on this earth. And there's so much trust that's involved in business, there's so much relationship that's involved in business, and the best way I know how to cultivate relationships is to be authentically myself and honor the way that other people show up. So that's what I think is a soulful CEO.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah,
And
you're
if
welcome.
people want to find out more about you, connect with you, or if there's any, way that you're currently working with people, where can people find out more?
Awesome. So you can find me in my second home, not where I sleep at night, but where I spend most of my time, is Boundaries Over BS on Instagram. So find me there on Instagram. I have all types of free resources, content, opportunities to work together. I've got everything you need and more. It all goes down on Instagram at Boundaries Over BS. And I'm super excited because this month, I haven't even released this yet to my audience, but the sneak peek
First
here
to
for anyone who's
know.
listening. Yeah, first to know. I'm doing a Boundary Bootcamp workshop on December 17th on Zoom. You can join us live, or you can sign up to catch the replay. And this is really like a skill building, get right in there. We do role play, we practice, people bring their scenarios. And it's just an opportunity to kind of feel out, what is it like to work together. It's an opportunity to get real solutions in real time to stuff that you're working on with boundaries. And it's $17 so that it can be as accessible to anyone as possible. So if you've been thinking about boundaries and you're like, okay, yeah, I don't know, maybe check it out. It's a fun, super fun time, and it's a group of women supporting each other. Like, I'm not the only person with knowledge in the room. Okay, this is like a shared experience. And so I would say, for anyone listening, I would love to see you at Boundary Bootcamp, or I would just love to have you join the community on Instagram and connect with you there.
Amazing. Both sound great. I'll make sure that the notes or the links to both of those are in the show notes. Perfect timing in terms of when the episode will drop. So it'll work out well for the workshop. And again, thank you so much for being on here and sharing your wisdom with us. And for everyone that was listening, thank you so much for being here. If you found the show helpful, please hit that follow or subscribe button. It really does help more people find the show and listen into conversations like this. And as always, if you have any questions about anything we've talked about, or you have any episode ideas or recommendations, just send me a DM on Instagram at KristinConstable. I'd love to hear from you. All right, until the next episode.